Welcome to another episode of Thoughts from the Big Chair. And joining me this week is Ed Jackowiak from CyGlass. How are you doing, Ed?
Doing quite well, Russell.
Fantastic. Now, some people may not have come across CyGlass. Maybe you give us a quick intro on yourself and CyGlass and tell us a bit more about the business.
My background is 20 plus years in the security space. Traditionally brought in as an early investment round as part of the new management team to help run and grow companies. They've ranged anywhere from pre-revenue up to $10 million in revenue. Syglass is my seventh one over the last 20 plus years. Right,
A lot
Syglass
of
is
bunch of them.
yeah, CyGlass is an interesting story in the history, right? It came out of the AI ML R&D research focused on the U.S. in the U.S. federal government space, right? We were brought on board and to take that technology and the work they had built for the various, shall I say, three-letter agencies for the government and commercialize that, right? So we spent, the last 3 plus years taking that AI ML technology and re-architecting it so it would play in the pure SaaS based model and play in market in where we're playing in from a space, and the problem we're solving is literally taking traffic off of an egress point. That traffic could egress point could be a router, switch, firewall, AD logs. We're taking that traffic, sending it up to a cloud platform, in this case AWS, where we are baselining behavior, learning what an individual or device is doing on a day in and day out basis. And using AI ML, we're looking for anomalies, threats, or deviations with that behavior, and we're surfacing that, right? The interesting thing I think we see from product and perspective wise, right, is the world has changed from on-prem solutions, appliance-based solutions. The transition to a pure cloud-based world, in a sense, as you see that more and more with platforms and applications out there. We played quite well on that, in a sense that we can use your existing hardware, software infrastructure on-prem or in the cloud, without adding any additional software or hardware on-prem. Take that traffic and send it up into the cloud. We can do it at cloud cost and cloud scale, right?
Now, I mean, I suppose, first of all, full disclosure for anybody that's listening, I'm very familiar with CyGlass because as CEO of Nominet, up until earlier on this year, I acquired the business for Nominet, February 2000, just before lockdown, unfortunately. What I was impressed about was A, the team, and B, the product. But help us understand, Ed, in a fairly crowded market of cybersecurity, how you've found your niche in that very busy marketplace.
Yeah, it is part of this comes back into the experience in doing this for the last plus 20 plus years. And one is there is an initial set of upfront homework we do. In part of that homework was looking at the market, looking at the competitors, looking at kind of the needs of what we're seeing from the customers, and it goes back to kind of your questions where we talk about the SaaS marketplace. What we identified before walking in was, the traditional players in those space were, shall I say, rack and stack appliances, right? They were installing hardware on-prem to doing the processing, right? It's a heavy lift. It's expensive, and it's also not kind of where the world is going. In a lot of cases, what the world is doing, especially with the advent of COVID, cloud-based applications. You saw a rapid accelerated shift, even with the advent of COVID and the pandemic, to moving faster than even what we predicted to cloud-based applications, right? So, one of the things that we saw walking into this was, you know, the good fortune of what they had done for work with the federal government was build, the fundamental components in a SaaS-based solution. And what we saw was a hole in that market space, in a sense that those competitors out there were appliance based, and there was a need to be able to solve this problem, in a SaaS based solution. And we had the foundation and the components there. What they needed to help was basically building out the final pieces and commercializing that to take that to market, right? And there was a lot of work. I say before we walked in, about 6 months worth of work of homework. Identifying the competitors, identifying the space, identifying the holes, and how we could fit and play into that space. And then I think the other side was bringing in the right team, right? There was a sense of a legacy team that was here, that was federal focused, government focused. And, we complemented that and added to that by bringing in a set of, excellent startup individuals that focused and had background in building cloud-based applications, right, to round out kind of the work they had done for the federal government, right? So, we identified the space, we identified the holes, we saw where we could play that the competitors out there weren't addressing. Um, and then honestly, we went out and built the product, identified a set of customers that would work with us to kind of refine it, identified the features and functions we need and how we address their problems. And with the team we had brought on place, fundamentally built the product, right?
And the concept of building a SaaS-based product, just talk us through that, because you made a very conscious decision not, as you say, not to go on-prem.
Yeah, well, what we saw and what I've seen just generally throughout my career is, I remember the day you would sell a multi-million-dollar solution, on-prem solution, right? Those days are fundamentally over, right? Customers are looking for flexibility. They're looking at, not writing those big checks anymore, right? How do I get, you know, um, efficiencies of the cloud? How do I get efficiencies of scale? How do I get efficiencies of deployment? Right. And what we saw was, the transition in the world it's going to is to be able to do these things by leveraging cloud, tools, cloud platforms to um, be competitive and build a solution from a price point that the on-prem and that, to be honest, our competitors couldn't touch, right? The cost of building that appliance, or building the appliance, supporting the appliance, putting that appliance on prem, makes it tougher and tougher to compete in the world as everything's going to a pure SaaS based environment, right? So the conscious decision was to be able to reuse a lot of those components, to reuse the leverage of the cloud, and be able to be at a price point that honestly people can't touch, right? In that had to be the conscious decision, because if we couldn't take advantage of those tools, couldn't solve the problem that we needed to solve by doing this in the cloud, we felt you wouldn't be competitive in the long run, couldn't survive in the world we're doing. Right now we're well positioned because of that price point, because of the flexibility of what we built. That I honestly believe, we have the ability to change the rules of the game against our competitors, because for them to make that transition and move to the cloud, they've got to rebuild what they have, right? And it's a fairly hefty undertaking.
And you mentioned the cloud a couple of times there, and obviously a key component of any SaaS-based solution. You went with AWS.
Yep.
Obviously, there's different choices, and people can choose different cloud providers. Why AWS? What was the draw there, and how hard is it to move around from
Yeah.
cloud provider A to B?
Yeah. Excellent question. Right. So when we started this endeavor going back in 3 years ago, AWS no doubt was the dominant player, right? From the tool sets, the capabilities they offered to us, the price point that was hard at that time, going back 3+ years ago, for other say cloud platform players to um, compete with, right? So initially that's how we approached it, but we also kind of looked at it, and we heard this from customers, we heard this from partners, we heard this in the general industry, right? Be careful, honestly, locking yourself into one specific cloud vendor. So we did make conscious decisions, although AWS offered us advantages in tooling that made the development easier, cost effective, faster. We avoided tying ourselves into anything that would not allow us to be flexible enough to look at other cloud providers down the road. And there are things like, building the platform on top of Kubernetes, right? So it allows us with some work to be able to lift and shift, right? Hey, if there is something that comes out with Google, changes the market and the landscape at a price point that, you know, offers us huge advantages, right? We have that flexibility there with a little bit of work, right? And we intentionally avoided tying ourselves into, and AWS specifically, that would make that either cost prohibitive or so difficult we could not move, because it would lock us into AWS and we'd lose some of the flexibility, we'd lose some of the control, and we're too dependent upon them. Because although there are huge advantages to the cloud platform, it is still one of the biggest costs we incur as a company to process and run in those environments, right? And we wanted the flexibility to lift and shift when we needed to at minimum cost to support, you know, as the world changes, different price points, different customers, different models. Um, so that all went into the kind of the thinking of what we built. Right.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And where do you see things moving to in the future then, in terms of the cloud technologies? Because they're all, kind of competing with each other in the sense that they're trying to get better and faster and more reliable. One of the interesting components of any cloud provider is their inbuilt security features. Now, it's slightly ironic given the fact that you're also looking at cybersecurity threats. I guess they are as well. How do you look through a cloud provider and say, actually, how do I know? Because if any compromise that happens at the cloud could ultimately impact the integrity of your service delivery.
Yeah. Same thing. I think that's an excellent question, right? In some sense, if you go back and look at the like AWS, there are no doubt some advantages they have given their history in the length they've been doing this around security and meeting compliancy rules and regulations and certifications that do make them more attractive, right? Um, from a customer perspective, and generally from a security perspective of what we're doing, what we have to offer our customers, and to put our name behind it, because the last thing you want is a breach. The last thing you want is to be able to go back to somebody, explain to somebody of you lost data, or something happened that disrupted their business, right? um, I will have to say, that's where I think still somebody like an AWS has some advantages because of their history. But what we do see is the industry rapidly catching up. The Googles, the Oracles, the other cloud providers out there, are spending a lot of time and effort providing, security in a ways that offers the protection that we need and the stability that we need, and re- reliancy, redundancy, and so forth, that um, it takes a lot of the burden off of what we have to build by leveraging their environments, because they offer that kind of rounded security um, platform that benefits us, right?
Mm.
At the same time, generally what we do see is those environments really stick with, hey, if I'm AWS, you get the best of AWS world if you use all of AWS's products. you know um, in other applications that run on AWS, right? Well, what we do still see is there's this heterogeneous world out there that people are still running on-prem applications. They're still running different applications in different cloud providers, and you need to be able to span all those environments, right? And although you get a lot of advantages by using one specific vendor, you still need to span and offer security across all those platforms. And that's kind of where we have to address and cover to make sure, hey, if somebody's using an application in Google and they're using an application in AWS and they have an on-prem application, right? How do you support that? How do you secure it? How do you provide the protection you need? And I think it's taking that blue product and be able to view from all angles and be able to address all those aspects, which, traditionally what we still see is those vendors are really focused on their world and want to try to bring you in. So you're, being all things and using all products, shall I say, AWS. And the reality is, I still think that's we see more and more of it, but customers are still running on-prem applications. They're still running in different, cloud environments, and I just see that trend continuing, right?
Mm.
For the exact reasons we discussed earlier. I'm not sure people like ourselves want to lock ourselves into one vendor, right? You become so secure, dependent on that vendor, from security, from infrastructure, for build. I think it's good to have all the other choices out there, right?
And you're internationalizing the business. And so going back to your point around having a number of different cloud providers, if you, for example, went into Australia
Yep.
from the US, do you still use the same cloud provider, or does the international angle put a different spin on it?
Yeah. So the same thing. I think, what the cloud platforms like AWS offer us, right? Being kind of the stage in the life cycle we're in as a company, our ability to build out the infrastructure would be too cost prohibitive to run in Australia, or to run in South America, to run, right? What somebody like AWS does is, we have one instance that is effectively running in all their environments around the globe. And I can, literally process, if there's a GDPR law and regulation that says, hey, data must stay in country, right? And, somebody like an AWS will allow me to do that, right? As opposed to bear the cost of setting up my whole own infrastructure to run and process in there, because those costs are cost prohibitive, especially as something like a company, at our size and where we're going and growing, right? Those are the huge cost advantages something like an AWS has by having all their local facilities around the world. And you're right, at this point in time, right, we leverage them in, they are our solution provider, and we're running in all their instances around the world, and that will continue. The downside of what I see from the other cloud providers is, they don't may not have that breadth yet. They may not be running in country processing, and then you do run into, issues around, sovereignty, GDPR laws and regulations where you must keep the data in country. Like I say, I think they're catching up as fast as they can, but, no doubt AWS has those advantages at a price point, and, gives companies like us the ability to do that we could not never afford to kind of handle that. And it gives us the ability to offer the price points we do, to be able to grow the way we can, and to be also offer the protection that customers need, knowing, hey, things are staying, or the data is staying in country, or we're processing the data in country. um yeah. So that's the advantage of something like an AWS has. In You say it will be harder and harder, um, to kind of, we can leverage those and move to other environments, but, those are right now kind of the advantages of using something like an AWS, right?
Yeah. And you alluded to it earlier on, but perhaps for the uninitiated listening, can you perhaps elaborate a little further on this kind of multi-tenancy and what that means, and how important it is for you as a service provider of SaaS platforms?
Yeah. In those were, like you say, you step back, and we looked at kind of when we brought in the team, and kind of looked at the challenges, to be able to manage this from a cost perspective, a scalability perspective, in what we built. In The real underpinning to all this is to be able to build a, multi-tenant SaaS environment. And the architecture, the design, the thinking has to be put in place before you're out embarking on building this, right? Because, the ability to take advantage of a multi-tenant environment, in a sense that I have, single instance of the environment that can support multiple customers, or multiple, you know um, firms or partners, right? Well, not, so I say, commingling in the data, um, right, is where you get the cost advantages and the scaling ability, um, from the cloud environments itself, like an AWS or a Google, right? In There's a lot of work and effort being, that was put into prior to building out the platform to make sure, we were architecting it properly. It could scale. It was being built in a multi-tenant way. So you could go to a partner, an MSSP, and they could support their install base or client base um, from one single instance. So our management, our resiliency, our backup, right? We're not doing this per client. We're doing this, at, at, one instance, right? And you're just a lot of efficiencies, a lot of cost advantages um, by designing and architecting that way, right? This would not be affordable or economical if I did this in a single tenant manner, and I had to manage and spin up instances each time for each customer, right? We could not be able to price the product the way we do. We could not support the environments the way we do. The team would grow exponentially because we'd have to have a small team managing a bunch of single individual instances. The advantage of a multi-tenant environment is, hey, you have an environment where you have a small team that can support hundreds, thousands of potential customers off of that single environment. So you derive these efficiencies that are honestly just not possible in a single tenant world, or in a lot of cases, even in a hardware software on-prem world, right?
Yeah, really clear. And the one of the challenges, and you're in the middle of this, as I understand it, is trying to scale a SaaS business. So, what are your insights, kind of the good, bad, and the ugly of scaling SaaS businesses, particularly in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah. Um, if I kind of look back in the conversations I've had, one of the things that we spent lot of time on is, there is a cost of processing the data in the cloud environment, and from an industry perspective, you want to look at a margin perspective. Say 60% is the bare minimum, but you want to be in the high 70s, low 80% margin. Um, when you're selling, the license we're selling out to customers. In One of the things you've got to seriously look at is, what is your cost? Can you maintain the margins in the 70-80% based upon what you're doing? Because it is, if I look at it in our case, right, as we build more features and functions, as we're processing more data, right, the cost of processing that goes up, which affects our margins, right? So the one thing we do spend a lot of time with is working on is, as we build more um, features and functions, to make sure it is highly efficient, right? That we're hitting those margins, that we're not processing the data multiple times, shall I say. The data behind the scenes is being done, processing is being done extremely efficiency. How do we do more with less, right? The other thing, we started supporting AD, about 12 months ago, right? We were able to grab more information out of AD and reduce some of our cost of processing, right? So, by that saving alone, it offsets some of the other features and functions we added, right? And I think that's the struggle. And a lot of things people forget about, right? When you're looking at designing this, right? You want to offer the most feature-rich product, functionalities, but it also has to be efficient in a way that you're paying those cloud costs every day, and you could be doing things that just blow your margins out of the water, and those are a lot of things you got to take into consideration of. I think people forget or don't pay attention to along the way. I think the other side is, as we mentioned this before, is being flexible enough, right? AWS is what we selected early on. The world is changing fast, right? What is the cost of being able to migrate or move? What's the cost of what's the lift of that? Because what happens if a vendor comes out and shakes up the market and all of a sudden they're half the price of AWS? Can we take advantage of that? Right? Do we have the flexibility to move in those other worlds and support those other environments? Right? Those are a lot of things that you look at and you try to make decisions as you build the business and you grow. You mentioned it before, supporting around the world. We've got customers in everywhere from South America to Australia to the U.S. Does a cloud provider allow us to do that? Can we run in those countries cost effectively? Because those providers charge more sometimes to process in those countries, right? Can we do it cost effectively, or is there enough margin in there? A lot of those things they say, um, you know, thought put in beforehand, thought put in how the architecture and design is done, really needs to be well thought out because they have long-term ramifications and effects down the road if it's not done right.
Yeah. And the I guess the other element that we talk about cost of acquisition, cost of customer acquisition, and the challenges that you've got in trying to scale. But you guys have gone through a mixture of direct sales force and channel partners. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, um, I think you know the world going back, as I mentioned before, is somewhat changed, right? What in some of the homework that we did from a business perspective, before we walked into CyGlass, and as we've evolved in um, with the company, right? We've seen a general shift of what customers are doing. Like we see more and more customers offshoring or outsourcing their their security, right? Uh, they struggle with finding people. They struggle with cost. They struggle with the cost of people, finding good resources, right? Um, so what we did see is a segment of the customer and partner base that you know was faced with those issues, and we saw the competitors out there in the landscape with a direct sales force going after large enterprise deals, which adds its own cost in, right? You're building out an enterprise sales force, you're building out a pre-sales, right, sales force, which can be a costly endeavor. How do we felt with the SaaS platform that we had built, we could come in and address a segment of the market that partners, managed service security providers, MSPs, resellers that were looking for, that could be our sales force, that could take us to market in address a need, shall I say, in a mid market, say 10,000 users and below, that wasn't being addressed by the competitors, right? And that it would allow us to leverage their sales force, leverage their ecosystem. Hey, if an MSSP's got 100 customers and they take CyGlass to market, I'm training that MSSP once. I'm supporting that MSSP, and they give me access to all 100 of those customers, right? So there's a cost efficiency of scale. There's a ability to leverage their uh, install base, their resources to basically take me to market that I don't bear, right? And I can turn around and pass that down now by cost savings in what I charge for the product because I don't bear that cost, right? Um, I think that's the one huge advantage you get out of that. The downside is you are somewhat removed from the kind of the customer, right? In a sense that I'm relying on that partner to take me to market to their end user customer or to their new customers. In the thing we really emphasize and work with those partners on in our ecosystem is you're my eyes and ears, right? You are my interface to that end user. And it's important that we have constant dialogue, we have constant feedback, because you're seeing trends, you're seeing problems in things they're trying to address or face with that, uh, uh, you know, I need you to tell me about, right? Because I may not, I won't, or may not have a direct interface to that customer, right? And I think that's the in some sense downside challenge. So you got to balance out by not you know effectively having this huge sales force that's going out there because they will provide more direct feedback. I got to rely on those partners to do that, and it's extremely important that you have the dialogue. And we do weekly calls with our partners. We walk through and have them give us features and functions that we embed and put it in the product, so we don't miss out on anything, right? And at the same time, now we're able to pass those cost savings back in what we charge for the product. And at the same time, I think the partners love that interaction because they know, once they tell us a feature or function, or they request a need, we put that in our roadmap. We work with them to get them what they need, right? And they love that interaction, right? They love to say, "Hey, I'm involved in building your product," right?
I think that's a really important point, though, isn't it? Because it could be quite easy for you to work with the channel, and things are going well, and therefore you just assume things are kind of rocking along. The product's fine, but
Yep.
getting that interaction with the sales force, whether it's your own sales force or via the channel, and getting ideas back into the product that you may have missed otherwise is critical. So is that something which you have developed any particular techniques over time? You can build it into your sprints. How are you managing that?
Yeah. So, as I say, I don't want to build what I want to build. I want to build what the customers need in their requests. So we literally have bi-weekly meetings with our partners. We go through and we will show them our product roadmap, and we will walk through that in detail with them with engineering on the phone. We will walk through the prototypes, we'll walk through the features and functions we're building, and we will have a collaboration process on a bi-weekly basis with those partners to make sure what we're building is aligning up to what they're seeing out in the market and hearing from their customers, right? And it also goes to in the partners that we're working with. We're a piece of a component, right? If I position ourselves in the network detection and response space, those partners may have an endpoint, they have a SIM, right? They have a variety. And the other thing is also important is to make sure we're doing the integration they need to be able to make it easy, so they're you know from a common dashboard perspective, right? They're not having to look at all three products to go and figure out what's going on. It's sharing data, making it easy for them to say, hey, when we find something that is an issue, we can either send it to the SIM or look at what they're seeing in the EDR, right? I think that's a other kind of um, and the world we're playing in now is to make sure all those interactions, that integration is taking place, because those partners are faced with the same challenge we all are, right? Resources are expensive, they're hard to find. How can I do more with less? And so to use the efficiency of the product, to use the efficiency of making it easier for them to integrate, so there is a common dashboard, either they may build themselves or they're using our dashboard, so they're not going to multiple products, right? And it is part of this whole roadmap. It's part of this working with them collaboratively on a bi-weekly basis and taking that feedback in like I say, every 2 weeks, showing them, hey, this is what we're building, this is what's in the sprints, right? Does it align? Does it, is it user friendly, is the way you're expecting it, right? And in all that, like I say, is put in with VP of engineering, product management, put into the roadmap, putting into the prototypes, and it's what we built, right?
Yeah. And now, having some good knowledge of CyGlass and some of the individuals involved, I can attest to the fact that the engineering team that you've got there is truly fantastic and world class. What are your kind of leadership lessons as you've kind of built CyGlass that you would share with others if they were about to embark on a similar sort of journey?
Yes. Do your homework up front, right? Um, you know, this if I look at the world that we the employees that we have, it's not a job, it's also part of family. I will tell you, I talk to probably uh more to the team than I do in some sense, my wife and my kids some days, right? Because it's just the nature of the business that we have. They become part of family. And the one thing I can tell you is you know upfront, before they come on board, right? Do they fit into the culture? Do they understand what they're about ready to embark at? Do they solve the problem, right, that we're looking at, right? It was very key, you know, um, our Ramesh, our VP of engineering, we brought on board, right? His background and experience was building out large scale SaaS based applications in the past, right? That experience was worth its weight in gold. That's on one side, but at the same time, the culture, the individual, the fit of that person within the organization, was that the right fit? Because he's the leader that everyone will be following, what's driving, what's being built, and we spend so much time working together as a group that if there was not a good fit, it caused more problems, even though his background was exactly what we wanted. And so there's a lot of time and effort going through and making sure, from a culture, from a people perspective, that they fit part of the team, especially in the early days, right? You know, it is, I can't emphasize enough, those early sets of employees that you bring on board to build the core foundation are so key and so important. Because if you mess up the design, you mess up the architecture, you may never recover from all that, right? And it wasn't part of just me going out and finding these people. It was a collaboration effort of spending time with all the employees we had, and they go through a process and they talk to everybody to make sure they're technically sound and also part of the team that fit into the culture well. It also becomes more harder with the COVID, because you're not together as much, right? You're now at home working, in so they have to be more independent and make decisions, maybe not in weekly scrum, or you're doing in a scrum that you may be sitting together, right? So a lot of that's changed, kind of with the world we live in, and it's all part of the decision process that we continue to do, especially still in the early stage, from that culture, the people, their work ethic, and kind of being able to do this, no longer sitting in an office every day. Right.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think the point around trying to do your homework and make sure they're the right fit. So many times you've got people who are technically competent, but if they're not aligned to the culture, then that's a big
Yes.
challenge for the rest of the organization for sure. Ed, CEO of CyGlass, I wish you all the best of luck in growing the business, and I'm sure you'll have every success. Thanks very much for coming on the show today, and I really appreciate you sharing your insights.
No problem. Thank you, Russell. I appreciate the time.